Fascinating numbers beating, revenue up about 5%. They're talking up automotive, networking, Internet of Things. But there is a clear Apple effect here. $1 billion of payments, they say, withheld by suppliers.
Absolutely. None of the near-term results don't matter, to be quite honest, Caroline. We had good results. Some China vendors' payments and the China handset shipments doing better than expected, offsetting some of the weakness from the Apple. In fourth quarter, remember that they report royalties in arrears. So we're talking about December payments now. But the March quarter guidance is wider than expected, indicating that if Apple were to withhold payments, then revenue would be a little lighter and EPS would be a little lighter as well. So it's the ongoing effect of Apple that is going to have an impact on Qualcomm over the next 4 quarters and over the next 2 years. And this litigation is going to take 2 years, mind you. The bigger issue is not even Apple. Right? If Apple were to win against Qualcomm, what does that do to the Qualcomm royalty model? I think that is the crux of the question. If Apple were to get a better deal from Qualcomm, would that apply to all of its handset customers? That is a even bigger issue. And if Apple were to win outright in the court, saying that the value of Qualcomm's intellectual property ought to be based on the value of the chip, and not on the value of the handset, as Qualcomm contends, then the royalty model is broken wide open.
Defunct. And what's fascinating, Anand, is you're talking up some of the risks here. The market seems to be shrugging it off. The shares are actually rising after hours. I've got a chart on my Bloomberg, G#BTV7908 if you're a Bloomberg user. And it shows you that actually only once have we seen shares pop after earnings in the past few quarters. And that was back in the third quarter of 2016. Usually they fall come what may. So I really want to get to the bottom of the optimism here as to, yes, the numbers did beat, but is there optimism in China in terms of the growth? Is there perhaps optimism elsewhere that is amidst the clouds?
Look, this is a near-term relief rally. I think the cloud overhang on Qualcomm was pretty dark for a substantial period of time, and the rhetoric that was coming out, mostly one-sided from Apple, was pretty sharp. That said, none of this has changed. I mean, just because they printed this one particular quarter that were slightly better than anticipated in a quarter that didn't really have the full Apple detriment, we shouldn't take our eye off the ball with respect to the Apple litigation. That is far and away the most important thing on the Qualcomm story in the near and intermediate term, in our view.
You're right, actually, if you're digging into the Bloomberg and showing how the price has reacted over the past few months. A big tumble in Qualcomm shares happened in January when we first learned of these ongoing regulatory issues. Indeed, it's FTC, European Commission. We've seen fines coming from Korea. What about capital return plans there? Are there any ways in which they can keep the shareholder a little bit happy, maybe pump up the share price from where we see it at 52 spots?
Sure. So the capital return story is going to aid them some. Most of their cash is overseas, so any sort of corporate tax changes or repatriation tax policy changes would help them substantially. So those are 2 areas where they can make some hay. Also, the NXPI deal is still on track to be closed by the end of this year. That could change the optics of the company from a revenue and an EPS perspective, and change the revenue exposure, reduce it a little bit towards the handset market and increase it towards the auto market where NXP is substantially exposed. All of these things are very nice, but again, I want to come back to the royalty model only because even though the revenues are lower in that area relative to the NXPI revenues or relative to Qualcomm's own chip revenues, the margin that the royalty business carries is upwards of 90%. It's upwards of 90%. So the EPS impact as a result of $1 of royalty income is substantially bigger than anything else. So unfortunately, as much as they would like to change the optics, I think that the most critical issue is unfortunately the Apple litigation. Now, Qualcomm's seen this before. This is not an unheard of story for Qualcomm. They've done this with Nokia, they've done this with Samsung, and there is precedent for them to have won through the courts and in settlement of deals. The question is, will they have the same result with Apple?